Right? Bro- broke them out. Yeah. Broke them out. She's a smart sucker. She reminds me of Randy Gillen's boy. He's a smart sucker. That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. She caught more than you thought. They say more is caught than taught, and that's. Yeah. Uh huh. Yeah. 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 That's awesome. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It's good. 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 You need to pray for everybody that's struggling through all this crazy weather. I got to know a bunch that my allergies have been killing me, but folks got colds and allergies, and then some got a couple of friends that have got COVID and all that. So it's a mix of everything. But surprise, surprise, when it's 40 to 70 to 30 to 60 to 80 to yeah, yeah. We don't know what to do with the temperature in here. Last week it was warm, and then it's like so. So all you folks that thought last week was great, don't plan for that to happen 2 weeks in a row. So this week will be cold. Okay. Mm. Donna, yeah, Brenda's daughter, for surgery tomorrow. All right, good enough. Norm, do you mind leading us in prayer?
Father in heaven, thank you for this day that we've had. Thank you that we can be together tonight. Thank you for the warm weather that we have today. And thank you for your goodness and your true words to us and your encouragement to us. Thank you for all the blessings that you allow us to enjoy. The times to be together and the times that we have good days. Thank you for all the praises that we have and that you did not mention here. Please be with anybody who is discouraged in our midst, and Brenda's daughter, and please encourage that family and her daughter. Help the surgery to go well. The doctors have wisdom and do a thorough job. Thank you for your word tonight. Please give us understanding and Tony wisdom as he's speaking and preaching, that we can use this and apply this to our lives and our families. In Jesus' name we give this thanks. Amen.
Amen. All right. Just that she's been trying to kind of keep up with her daughter, and her daughter's having surgery tomorrow morning. So, But I think it's in Dallas. Do you know? Yeah. Yeah. Now her eyes, I don't. Okay, so she got a good report on her eyes. Well, good. Yeah. She said what, Brenda? I'm sorry.
She was really afraid it'd be something bad, but she said she got a good report.
That's good. Good. Good, good, good. All right, 1 Samuel. First Samuel 7. Last week we kind of went through some of the stuff with the ark, We talked about how God was showing, mighty and lowering and those kinds of things. Some of the stuff that sometimes wouldn't be seen, and with the use of the term the heavy, the glory of God being heavy, substantial in relation to that. So a little bit of a extension of that then this week. The men of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord, brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim, the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So now this 20 years is a time period that's not speaking about that's the total time that it's been at this place, but the total time that it's speaking of right now at this time. So from the time when you had this occurrence, Philistines get it out of our land, until what we're fixing to talk about right now, you've got about 20 years, because it's going to be, it's not going to be until David comes into the scene that it leaves, and that's going to be a total period of about 100 years. So just kind of a little side note there. But you're kind of jumping, when we read a narrative, we think about it in chronological order, and it's like one scene right after the other. We don't think that 20 years has basically passed, right? So you've got a long period of time here where it's like things have just been happening, but things haven't been really happening. Nothing's been, seems like it's been going on in relation to that. Samuel spoke, verse 3, to all the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all of your heart, remove the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your hearts to the Lord and serve him alone, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So the sons of Israel removed the Baals, plural, Baals, and Ashtaroth, and served the Lord alone. The gods that they're probably serving here are the Canaanite gods, and gods of fertility, and gods of weather. So, and there is a sort of a mythical belief that if these two gods come together, then it brings fertility to the land, both through the produce and through the rains and through all these things. So this wasn't per se an uncommon thing. And so basically they pulled in the Canaanite gods and have been worshiping them for their, if you will, livelihood.
The Ashtaroth, they had actually an image?
Yeah, they would both have images. Yeah, to my understanding, they would both have made graven images and then worship them as gods. There, the Bible always brings in this with a couple things that are common with idols. Is one, it makes no sense. Why are you worshiping image that you created with your own hands? How can an image that you created with your own hands be more powerful than you? So there's not a sense about, it's not sensible in relation to that. And then the second thing is you become like the idols that you serve. You always become like that which you are worshiping and serving. So when you worship a dead image, what do you become? Dead image. You're alive. You're alive, but you're not alive, right? So, but they're attributing life, that these things have life. So life of weather, thunder, rain, life of fertility, both fertility within the family, but also fertility when these two have intercourse, and that fertility now comes upon the earth in relation to that. And you got 20 years where, for lack of a better term, God's been sort of silent in relation to that. I heard a guy say once, it hadn't been that long ago actually, in a men's Bible study once, and he made a comment I thought was really, was right. He said, just because the silence of God doesn't mean it's an endorsement from God, and those are wise words. So that you see that's a pattern you see in Scripture, that there's almost the idea that, well, because God's silent on it, He's endorsing it, or He is approving of it, and the answer to that is no. It's just God's doing different things. And sometimes he's letting those things raise up to such a great extent for all to see, even the angelic realm, what actually is. It has to ferment and grow for it to be able to see for what it is. You have a child who's got this little oomph in him, right? It's just this little bit of, and sometimes mom and dad squash it out, right? But then sometimes the child thinks, well, it was nothing, and the siblings are there watching. It was nothing. Mom and dad are hard. So sometimes mom and dad let that go a couple of times, and then that little oomph, right, becomes a rebellion towards brother, sister. And then mom and dad say, what do you think about that now? They've let it grow to the point in which now they see what it was that all the time, but it wasn't seen for that. And so a lot of times God is doing this in relation to what he allows to grow. Well, I don't remember when, and I don't want to get into the whole political thing, but I don't remember when Roe versus Wade was originally, what year, do you remember what year that was? Maybe, 70s, early 70s, let's just call it. Early 70s, this is a little seed that so what? What's the big deal? So now we're 50 years removed from that. Are we in the billions yet? I don't know. In terms of how many babies have been murdered? Yeah, so you're at a half a billion. Half a billion. Yeah. Yeah. If God, and again, God's not endorsing that, right? God's not endorsing that. But point being, if God at that point would have squashed it, it wouldn't have seemed for probably being as atrocious as what it actually was. It seemed like some little court battle of someone saying, I have a right to do what I want to, kind of a thing. So you've got 20 years here, and it seems to me like this 20 years, it's God allowing things to sort of ferment and to show things as they are in relation to that. So Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah. I want to circle that. Mizpah is kind of a place that's, God has sort of several things. A lot of times in the past, present, future, he's got several things that go on at Mizpah. It's going to be, Saul is going to come into play, and this is going to be a town that comes up in relation to that. And I will pray to the Lord for you. They gathered to Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the sons of Israel at Mizpah. I've not done an in-depth study on fasting, but one thing that it seems like fasting does is it calls attention to God, because you're saying with your basic necessities of life, I care more about this in relation to you, God, and my relationship to you, God, over the basic essentials of life, food and water. So when I'm voluntarily depriving myself of food and water and pouring my heart out before God, there's something going on there just in terms of basic necessities of life that I'm foregoing because my heart is this burdened in relation to that. Hannah didn't eat because she was burdened, right, before God. So the pouring out of the water is probably symbolic of that. When the Philistines heard that the sons of Israel had gathered to Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel, and when the sons of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. So Philistines are in the land, and they're going to now attack Israel because they hear Israel's gathering together. Good opportunity to attack, right? The sons of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. Samuel took a suckling lamb, offered it for a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Samuel cried to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. Samuel was offering up the burnt offering. The Philistines drew near to battle against Israel, but the Lord, notice what it says, thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines and confused them so that they were routed before Israel. Right? Who is the God over all other little g gods? And the answer is Yahweh. Yeah. The men of Israel went out of Mitzvah, pursued the Philistines, and struck them as far as below Bethkar. So, does God need Israel's help? Does God need our help in battle? No. I was actually visiting about this this week with a guy, and we were just talking about how it's amazing that God invites us into what He is doing because He has no needs. So God does not need our help in any of these things. But He invites us to participate in that. In one of the Chronicles of Narnia, and as far as I know, in all of those movies of C.S. Lewis, there's an ebb and flow in which the children who are leading the war fail in some sort of way, and Aslan, the lion, as representative of God, comes in and defeats the enemy. And then following that, when they, the human leaders, these children, get up onto the podium to address the people, the lion is standing behind them. The people are cheering to victory in relation to these children, small people, young people, leaders, but it's the lion behind them that saved them in battle in relation to that. God has no needs. God does not need a judge. God does not need a king. God does not need an army. He has no needs. And this is one of the things that happens in relation to us as a Christian. When we recognize that God has no needs, but pours and flows over into us, we recognize that His filling of us then reflects that in the same way to others. So when I am full with the greatness of God, I naturally overflow into the life of others. And I'm not doing something because I have a need. I need to get something back in return. I'm able to give because I am full in my relationship with God. Doesn't mean that we don't need each other. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that this overflow comes from God, and now that conduit is each other as we're overflowing into each other. It's it's a reflection of who God is. When you find a person who, I'm going to be friends with Norm because Norm has something to offer to me, that's not a reflection of God. Why? Because God has no needs. But when I am befriending Norm, let's just say there's some way in which I could help Norm, right? And it's not so that I can receive something back from him. It's just that God has blessed me in this way to be able to help him in any particular thing, right? There's almost a sense with Norm where, well, there's no way I can really pay you back. That's the way we ought to be in our relationship with God. There's no way I can pay God back for all that God has done for me. So that's what He says to His disciples whenever He comes in there and says, they ask, how often ought we to forgive? 7 times? What does He say? 7 times 70, which means unlimited. What do they say? It's interesting. They say, increase our faith. Increase our faith. That's exactly right. How do I do that? And Jesus' answer to them is, when you do these things, you just say, it's what we ought to have done. I could never repay back God for all that He has done for me. And so life's meant to flow that way. So when you have stories like this, they come. It's a transition where you're coming to the end of the judges, which God had no need of, and you're going to enter into the time of the kings, which God has no need of. So to give a land to a people, God has no need of man to be able to give them that land. But He invited Israel into that opportunity to experience the power of God. So Israel has the opportunity to experience the power of God and overtake the land. Why? Because of the power of God, not because of their personal power. And God has no need for them. When they do that, then they are blessed and God is glorified, because ultimately who's doing it? It's God who's doing it, right? And so for 20 years, Israel has basically been sitting there under oppression, and Philistines have continually oppressed them. Samuel comes in and says, turn back to God. They turn back to God, and ironically, it's right at that time the Philistines decide to strike, because they're assembled together, and they say, don't cease, don't stop crying out to God for us. Now, the ark's been there the entire time. So it's not an issue of whether or not the presence of God was there or not. And so Samuel does. God, through thunder, confuses and drives out the Philistines. And guess who gets to run after them? Israel does. Yeah, Israel does. So not many know this story, but they know the song that came from this story. Not many know the story, but they know the song that came from this. The Samuel took a stone, set it between Mizpah and Shin, and named it Ebenezer. Remember that song, Dave? Here I raise my Ebenezer. Right? Comes from this passage. Yep. That story actually, that song actually is of a man who, as I understand this to be true, a man who came in to minister in a church once, got on his knees, cried out before God, became a minister, and following becoming a minister, basically walked away from the faith. And in walking away from the faith, he was in a place and was approached, and this person was singing this song, and he's attributing this to, yeah, that was me. I wrote that song. There's this rise and this fall. There was this coming up to God, but then there was this fall following that, and then this raising back up by the hand of God. So when we sing that, here I raise my Ebenezer, we think that's a person almost, right? But Ebenezer was actually referring back to this account. So he took a stone, set it between Mizpah and Shin, named it Ebenezer, and said, thus far has the Lord helped us. So it's a memorial stone for the help of God. The hand of God has helped us. And they set up a memorial for that. This is interesting because, a lot of times people ask or wonder, is it good or is it right to have, if you will, memorials in memory of? It depends upon what you are remembering and for what purpose you are remembering it, right? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Those things are meant to be a testimony. It's interesting because, like Israel had this before, when they crossed over and they told Moses and then later Joshua set up memorial stones. When they said, why did you set up these memorial stones? So that when your children come and ask, what do these stones mean? Well, why would children have to ask what they mean? Yeah, why don't they know? The parents didn't teach them. And so here's what you have to remember about that. The more you see something, the less you see it. And the less you see something, the less you speak of it. So, I always use the thought, a lot of times people put, and it's not a bad thing, but you'll put, and I could ask y'all, how many Bible verses do you have on your wall? But when's the last time you really saw it? It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I don't mean that at all. It's just the point is the more that you see it, the less that you see it. And the less that you see it, the less you speak of it. So when you set up a memorial stone, it's meant to be a reminder, but when you pass by all the time, with any kind of regularity, you'll miss it. You won't see it anymore. But when the next generation comes and says, what is that? It brings you back to, it's kind of like, I love a lot about the digital age. It is amazing. We live in amazing times. We really do. It's amazing, the digital age. But there's one thing that I miss. I miss the old photo books that sat on the coffee table. Yeah. We used to go to Uncle John. My Uncle John lived up in Iowa, and they always had an old photo book on the coffee table. So when we would go visit them, I was always bored as a kid, so I would just grab the photo book and start looking at it, right? What did it do every time? Yeah, because I'm saying, what was this? And who is that? You got 3 kids here that look the same. And it was my dad and his 2 brothers. And they're 7 years apart, and I couldn't tell which one was which. Well, whenever I showed it to Dad, and he can attest to this, when I showed it to him, it brought him back to that memory, that point, because he was there, you know. And then all of a sudden, you weren't just talking about that picture, you were talking about how combines were in that day. And we walked to school uphill both ways in the snow, and you think this weather's bad, you just should have seen it back then. It was 30 below and 8 foot of snow, and we had to walk on top of it and tunnel our way in, and all that kind of stuff. But that's right. But what do those old photo albums do? They're like memorial stones that brought you back to moments in your life that then those who hadn't lived that life can say, what was this? And they bring you back to that point. Yeah, they bring you back to that point. So I say that it's important to have these things, if for nothing else. When you have those moments, you're able to go back to those moments and remember them. Yeah, remember them. Yeah. Yeah, yep. Yeah. So that's what they do. The Philistines were subdued. They did not come any more within the border of Israel. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron even to Gath, and Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines, so there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. So again, God needs no help. He drives the Philistines back. They're no longer inhabiting. They still attack some, but they're not inhabiting Israel's land. And then notice, and you probably want to circle this, Samuel judged. Most don't think about Samuel as a judge, right? It's like, well, we're through with the judges. Samuel acted as a priest and as a judge, and he's going to usher in the reign of the kings. Yeah. He used to go annually on circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mitzvah, and he judged all of Israel in all these places. Then his return was to Ramah, for his house was there, and there he judged Israel, and he built an altar and he built there an altar to the Lord. Some people have the misconception that there was only one central place where an altar could be built, but that's actually not the case. Yeah, that's actually not the case. So you see that even there, Samuel is worshiping God on behalf of the people where he was. Chapter 8, and we're only going to go. I don't know that we're going to go all the way through this. It came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, the name of his second Abijah, and they were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice. Who does that sound like? It sounds like Eli's sons. Sounds like Eli's sons. It sounds like history's repeating itself. Right? God's shown himself, but now you've got time and distance has passed, and their priest, judge, leader's son, they're not doing well. Samuel is transitioning, if you will, over to them, so they've got now influence in relation to Israel, but the influence and what they're doing is not good. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "Behold, you have grown old." How would you like to be that person? Hey, you're old, right? Time for a change. We may feel that way, we just don't like to hear it. Yes, I know. Yeah, that got his goat. Yeah. Nathan's usually pretty laid back, but that got his goat. Yeah, I know it. Yeah, it was out of left field. Yeah. Yeah. Said, you've grown old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now notice that there's a distinction here though between him and Eli that I see. Some say, well, Samuel didn't do right before his sons like Eli didn't do right before his sons. But Samuel's not presented in the same light as Eli. So there's some similarities, but there's also some distinctions. The sons look the same, but Dad does not. Your sons don't walk in your ways. See, that was not said of Eli. In fact, when we looked at it last week in terms of Eli being heavy and how all of that was playing in, it's like Eli was being a part of all of this. Right? Appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. But the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord. I love that. When people bother you, where do you turn? Yeah, when people bother you, where do you turn? And the answer is turn to the Lord. God, what say you about this? That is so important. You're old, your sons are wicked, we want a king. And it ate Samuel up. What did he do? He turned to God. God, what do you think about this? Because Samuel's not going to know Samuel doesn't know how to respond otherwise. How am I supposed to respond to this? Most individuals, when attacked on the horizontal in some way that's displeasing, the response is to go straight back horizontal. Samuel doesn't do that. When attacked horizontally and the thing that they say go in this direction, and Samuel is still has enough influence here to lead all of this, right? And that's another distinction between Samuel and Eli. God says, "Hey, look at the sons and what's going on here. You're not changing direction and rebuking them as you ought." Right? Well, Israel's coming here wanting to change direction. We want to go towards king. And this is eating up the soul of Samuel. What does Samuel do? He turns to God, prays to God. What do you think about this, God? What do you think about this so I know how I ought to think about this?
Kind of reminds you of Moses.
Samuel is, it's interesting because Samuel there's not really a lot of material on Samuel, but he's super influential and just gives great wisdom, direction, real life stuff. Remember, Deuteronomy says that there's a time in which a king will be appropriate. Samuel doesn't sense that this is that time. So that's part of it as well. It's not necessarily just a human slight. It's that in Deuteronomy, God says there's going to be a time in which Israel having a king is appropriate. But Samuel doesn't sense that's what's going on here. He doesn't get a sense that Israel is crying out to God saying, God said in Deuteronomy that there's a time appointed for us to have a king. So we want that to be this time. Samuel doesn't sense that's what the case is here. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because in Deuteronomy it says this is what that king will look like. This is what that king will look like. The wrong king will take your stuff. He'll feed his own kingdom, if you will. A good king will will be a giving king. Will be a blessing to you because it will represent the God to whom he serves. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. He was here once, and we're waiting for him to return. Yeah. Yeah, he was here once, and we're waiting for him to return. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." Is there ever a time when you in leadership do that which the people say because God says yes? In the life of Samuel, it is actually, yeah, that's the case. Because there's sometimes God is doing bigger things than what you and I necessarily sense or see. Yep. Like all the deeds which they have done since the day I have brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. So have they inwardly changed? See, they haven't. Listen to their voice. However, you shall solemnly warn them and tell them of the procedure of the king who will reign over them. So the answer is yes, but you be careful in how you speak this to them. I want you to say this very, very carefully. When you tell them, okay, I want you to be very careful in how you tell them that. Because what I'm going to tell them, they're going to be held responsible and accountable for. So Samuel spoke all of the words of the Lord. So he's going to say exactly what God told him to say to the people. He said, "This will be the procedure of the king who will reign over you. He will," what? "Take your sons and place them for himself in his," what? "Chariots, and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and fifties, some to do his plowing, to reap his harvest, to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots." They have not had to have this up until this point. They didn't have to have a king draft them or say, "Firstborn is going to serve me," or X number of crops are coming to me. Didn't have to have that up to this point. He will also take your daughters for perfumers and cooks. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. He will also take your male servants and your female servants and your best young men and your donkeys and use them for his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. So from verse 11, we see he will take. Verse 12, he will point. Verse 13, he will take. Verse 14, he will take. 15, he will take. 16, he will take. 17, he will take. And this is who we want. Sound familiar? Then you will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. The people, what did they do? They knew what Samuel was saying to them. They knew what God was saying to them. But they what? Refused to listen. Yeah. You know, the thing we've got to be very aware of as Christians, and we've got to not be disgruntled about, is that people will ask for things to their own demise. They will do that. Darkness will do that. And so even though we're proclaimers of light and proclaimers of truth, we ought not to be surprised when people choose darkness over light in relation to that. It's a condition. It's a condition of the heart, right? And so we should see people as. It's not just that, oh, man, they're stupid. Man, they're so stupid. Why would they do that? They're so stupid. It's not about stupidity. It's not about ignorance. It's about a heart condition. It's about a heart and soul condition. So we shouldn't be surprised. It's not new to history. It's just maybe new to us in some ways.
It's right there in front of you all the time. You can't see it because it's right there in front of you.
Yeah. There's certainly that as well, and most of us have been raised up and trained in terms of just the culture in which we live, is that knowledge on its own merit is God. As long as you have knowledge, you're going to be okay. So, if you don't have knowledge, then, you're ignorant and you're just stupid and you're, all these things. It always comes back to knowledge. Samuel clearly laid out the knowledge that they needed in order to make a wise decision. But do they make a wise decision? No, because what's the problem? The problem ain't what they know or don't know. They can look up and see other nations and see what happens when they have kings. They can see that. It's not a knowledge problem. What's the problem? We're going to find out. It's a heart problem. Problem is I don't want God to rule over my heart. Right? What I see it's 100%. I would say 100%. What happens, the progression that constantly happens, and I think we have got to be constantly aware of, is when you receive the blessings of God, you stop seeing and experiencing the blessings of God, and you become ungrateful for what you have. And you become covetous on what you don't have, and what you are desiring is something that you don't have. That's what you're desiring, what I don't have. And when you get it, guess what? You're not happy, because what you wanted was what you didn't have. So getting it doesn't satisfy you. Getting it doesn't satisfy you, because what is it that you wanted? You wanted something you didn't have. That's all you wanted. You just wanted something you didn't have. That's what you wanted. You didn't necessarily want that thing. You just wanted what you didn't have. So there's no logical reason when you look at how God had blessed them. Who doesn't want a God who, through himself, drives away the Philistines, and all you do is go run after them and clean up? And you are able to serve this God and keep 100% of your crops, 100% of your kids, live at 100% in your land, safely guarded. Well, you would say, intellectually, well, who doesn't want that? Well, man doesn't like God ruling the heart. Man doesn't like to say, God is God and I'm not. And we have to be careful, because that's in our heart too, can be. It's in our heart that says, I want to be God. I want to rule. I want to be God. It's an evil thing. It's an evil thing. And we justify it by all of these other things. The reality is, you drive it down, that's what's going on. So he clearly communicates what God has said. So he lays it out just like God has said. But the people refused to listen, verse 19, to the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we might be, and that's what Roger was alluding to, like all the other nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. See, if we have a king, we can see him. If we see a king, then he's got something to lose. God doesn't have anything at stake. How can we trust God? If we have a king ain't going to lose any battles. How can we trust God? I'd rather have a king that I see that's going to take all of these things from us than a God that I can't see. Now after Samuel heard all of these words of the people, he repeated them in the Lord's hearing. So he says to the Lord, here's their response. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to their voice and appoint them a king. So Samuel said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city. Yeah, a sad day for Samuel and Israel both. But it's a quick 2 little chapters, but a long time and distance that went through all that. You know, there's a song that says, you know, it's a slow fade. It's a slow fade. You know, where you move into a place that can totally reject God, and you look up and you're never where you thought that you would be. But it's right where you wanted to be, ironically. And that's where Israel finds itself. So we have the transition. Samuel is the transition from judges to king. And that's the transition right there. God shows himself to have no needs, deliver Israel in battle through victory. They have memorial of Ebenezer to show that God did it. And they say to Samuel, because Samuel's kids they use Samuel's kids in essence as scapegoats. Hey, you're getting old, and these kids are fixing to take over, and we don't want evil judges to be over us. Why was it evil for them to say that? For them to think that? What pattern do they have that they've lived through that says that God can overcome that? Well, and so how did Samuel come into play? Following who? 2 wicked sons. 2 wicked sons. So can God not raise up another judge like Samuel, even though his 2 sons are wicked?
What's so ironic about it is they want to go ahead and give up their sons to a king to have their sons killed in battle, so they can say that someone else is fighting their war,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually their sons that are fighting their war, and the sons are going to lose the battle.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's such a veil-covered deceit that says, "Oh no. Yeah, no, it's gonna work out. It's gonna work out." You know. Well, did you have it that bad? Yeah. Did you really have it that bad? But all these others, they've got these strong kings that lead them into battle. Saul is going to look like what? Big, strong king. But what are we going to find out about Saul? When he goes, he's going to confront Goliath, but what are all of them doing? And see, you see that tall, small thing going on there. And it all comes back from all of what's already been predicted. Yeah, and then all of a sudden he gets jealous. Yeah, and Saul does a lot of great things, but Saul is kind of a picture of all that too, because Saul's never happy with what he has. He wants what he doesn't have. So he's always he's oftentimes focused on what he doesn't have rather than what he does. Yeah.
God gave him exactly what he wanted. A man that stands head and shoulders above anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
They looked at him and they said, "Hey, there he is.
Yeah.
Look at that big, strong."
Yep. And Samuel as leader, if you got different lenses to look at it. So when you look at it from Samuel's perspective as a leader, sometimes you're leading to a people through a place that it looks like you just did what? God's saying, yeah, that's the way we're going to go. Yeah, we're going to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, last couple Sundays, one of the things we said about faith is if you want to see faith, find risk. If you want to see faith, find risk. Samuel exhibits faith in places like this through rejection. So here they're rejecting him, and now he's taking Israel to what seems like a worse place. But he through that risk exhibits faith in God and does that which God has said. He's going to do it again whenever his heart is connected with Saul. And God says to Samuel, how long are you going to stay and connected with Saul? How long is your heart going to stay connected with Saul? What does Samuel do? He's risking relationship there with Saul and all of everything that meant. But what's he doing? It says he never went back to Saul after that. So that's where you're seeing Samuel have faith. It's interesting when you think about this relational connection with Samuel, if you think about Samuel's family background, how he grew up.
I was reading about that this morning, about all the individuals that God used that didn't have regular parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On and on, you know.
Yeah.
Hannah was Saul.
Yeah.
Samuel.
Yeah.
And just one right after another. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. You almost. I don't know if there is there probably is. I just haven't really thought about it. But I don't know if there is a central figure that we think of as central that doesn't have a family background that's just messed up. Joshua's was. David's was. You look at Jesse and what was going on with that whole family. Of course, Solomon's was. You know.
They come from a real low esteem where it takes God to pull them up and mold them into somebody. It's kind of like the song, the potter and clay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an amazing thing to me that kind of caught me off guard a little bit several months ago is that it's the importance of understanding that God allows you to define your family. So because there's no individual that hasn't come from a dysfunctional place. So in coming from a dysfunctional place, God gives the availability to define your family. And now, what's our connection? Is a father who cares for us in the greatest of ways and gives us the availability to love each other as a true family who is incomplete apart from each other. You know. And we have countless examples of that throughout. Because all of us know that no matter when someone else looks at our life and says, well, man, they've got it good, the reality is they just don't know our life. Because nobody here has got it. Hate to inform you, but nobody here has it together. None of us have got it fully together. Still working on it. Yeah, still working on it. Yep. So, all right, let's pray. Father God, grateful for this day, grateful for the opportunity we have just to study your word and worship you and just see how you work throughout time and history and the things that carry over into the time that we live today. And so grateful for that, and just pray, Father, that you just continue to grow us in your word and for your kingdom's sake and for your glory. These things we pray in your Son's holy name. Amen.